Protectionism. Although many governments believe that free trade would benefit the economy, sometimes it is in the country's interest to restrict trade and carry out protectionism measures. Protectionism is an approach used by governments to protect domestic producers. Some reasons for protectionism are preventing dumping. Dumping is when a foreign firm sells large quantities of a product for very low costs in the domestic market. This unfair competition would mean that domestic producers would not survive in the market. Trade barriers can be used to prevent this. Protecting employment. If there is too much unemployment due to overseas competitors, governments can impose trade barriers to save jobs. Unemployment would result in the government being criticized, especially if it is due to cheap imports. Protecting infant industries. Infant industries are new industries that are not yet established. If governments believe that infant industries must be protected from strong overseas competition, they may impose trade barriers. However, government might mix infant industries with potential industries. Gain tariff revenue. By imposing or raising tariffs on imports, governments can raise revenue. This revenue can be used to improve living standards within the nation. Preventing harmful goods. Governments can use protectionism if it feels that overseas producers are trying to sell goods that are harmful or undesirable. Reduce account deficits. If a country has a large current account deficit, they may be forced to impose trade barriers. To reduce current account deficits, nations increase exports and reduce imports. Methods of protectionism. Tariffs. One approach to trade barriers is to make imports more expensive. This would reduce demand for imports and increase demand for domestic goods. Taxes on imports are tariffs or customs duties. This also raises revenue for the government. Although globalization is happening at a very high rate, there are many countries still imposing tariffs on imports. Import quotas. Another approach to trade barriers is to place a physical limit to the amount allowed into the country, called an import quota. This would reduce the competition for domestic producers and give a larger share of the market to domestic producers. However, quotas would result in an increased price for the imports available. An embargo is a complete ban on international trade, usually for political reasons. Administrative barriers. Another way to reduce imports is when governments have strict regulations that imported goods have to meet. Sometimes legislation is passed to prevent entry if goods aren't up to the regulations. Subsidies. Another approach to protectionism is by giving a subsidy to domestic producers. Subsidies will lower prices because subsidies reduce production costs and increase supply. Subsidies would also make it easier for businesses to break into foreign markets. Impact of trade restrictions. Short-term impact. In the short term, trade barriers reduce overseas competition, so domestic producers can thrive. If tariffs are imposed, domestic producers would have an increased sale volume, revenue, and profit. When quotas are imposed, the import quantity is reduced, which allows domestic producers to fill in the gaps of demand. Long-term impact. In the long term, businesses would benefit from free trade, as protectionism policies would harm the business. Permanent government subsidies would help businesses more. Free trade would increase the competition and give an incentive for producers to be more efficient in order to survive in the market. Retaliation. If one country imposes tariffs on goods from another country, the other would often do the same in return. This means that tariffs are placed on both nations, reducing the exports of both.